Pakistan International Airlines, I will talk about the same incident that earlier happened in Karachi, crashed near the Jinnah International Airport in Karachi just before landing. The airline spokesperson says 91 passengers, 2 pilots and 5 crew members were on the board. He said the Airbus A320 aircraft was on its way to Karachi from Lahore. Reacting to the crash on Twitter, Prime Minister Imran Khan said an inquiry will be launched into the incident immediately. He expressed grief over the tragedy and said he was praying for the crash's victims. Several houses have also been damaged in the area where the plane crashed. The Pakistan Army Quick Reaction Force and Rangers Sindh troops arrived at the crash site shortly to assist in relief and rescue efforts. To speed up efforts, an army team accompanied by search and rescue specialists with equipment was flown from Rawalpindi through a special flight. Army's media wing said 10 fire tenders employed at the site have extinguished the fire as well. It said military ambulances are busy rescuing the injured and providing necessary medical care. Several global leaders and officials have expressed their condolences following the crash of the Pakistan International Airlines passenger aircraft. More in this report.
Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said he is deeply saddened by the plane crash in brotherly Pakistan. In a tweet, the Foreign Minister said Pakistan's pain is Ankara's pain. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani said his heart goes out to the families of victims who lost their lives in the PIA plane crash in Karachi. The Russian embassy in Pakistan also expressed its condolences. In a tweet, it said Moscow shares the grief of those who've lost their loved ones. Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli also expressed grief over the loss of lives.
Pakistan has reported its worst day in the fight against coronavirus with the highest single-day deaths and infections so far. The Health Ministry said 50 more people died while 2,603 tested positive over the last 24 hours. The death toll has risen to 1,067 with the total number of infections 50,694. The ministry said 15,201 patients have recovered. It said 336 new infections were recorded in Sindh province, 310 in Punjab and 365 in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Meanwhile, Balochistan reported 39 more cases and the capital Islamabad 12 more. Meanwhile, in the US, over 1,200 more people have died from COVID-19, increasing the tally to over 94,000. Meanwhile, Brazil recorded 1,188 deaths in 24 hours, pushing the toll to over 20,000. Worldwide, the death toll has exceeded 333,000, with over 5.1 million people infected. More in this report.
Many countries are lifting restrictions as new deaths and the spread of the virus continue to slow. U.S. President Donald Trump says the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will issue guidance for reopening very soon.
I think CDC is going to put something out very soon. Spoke to them today. I think they're going to put something out very soon. We got to open our churches. People want to go in. I saw a scene today where people are trying to break into a church, to go into the church, not to break in and steal something, to break in. They want to be in their church. I said, you better put it out, and they're doing it, and they're going to be issuing something today or tomorrow.
Over in Australia, New South Wales will ease restrictions allowing cafes, restaurants and pubs to have up to 50 seated patrons. Australia is now asking the UK to exempt its travellers from the 14-day quarantine. Meanwhile, in Scotland, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has outlined a 4-phase incremental plan to ease lockdown restrictions from May 28th.
The lockdown restrictions have been absolutely necessary to mitigate the massive harm caused by the COVID-19 virus. However, the lockdown is creating harms of its own: loneliness and social isolation, deepening inequalities and serious damage to our economy. None of us want it to last any longer than it has to. So today we are setting out the phases in which we will aim to ease the lockdown.
Chechny's leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, has been taken to a hospital in Moscow after he started showing symptoms of the coronavirus.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says Israel is a cancerous tumor in the Middle East that should be confronted until Palestinians are liberated. In a speech on Jerusalem Day, Khamenei called on Palestinians to continue their uprising against Israel. The Supreme Leader said the long-lasting virus of Zionists will be eliminated soon. He said a referendum must be conducted in the region as Palestinians are in the majority. Khamenei and other senior Iranian officials have called repeatedly for an end to the State of Israel. Jerusalem Day is an annual event held on last Friday of holy month of Ramadan. It was declared by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini in 1979. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has called on the international community to take urgent measures to prevent Israeli annexation of the West Bank. In a statement, the OIC said any measures taken by Israel towards annexing Arab lands are inconsistent with the international resolutions. It called on the international community, especially the UN, to take urgent measures to prevent the implementation of the settlement plans. The body stressed that a lasting solution to the issue would be through two-state solution and the establishment of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Israel is expected to annex parts of the West Bank on 1st of July, as agreed between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz. Palestine has rejected an aid shipment from United Arab Emirates after it arrived at Israel's Ben-Gurion airport. In a news conference, Health Minister Michaela said Palestine refused to receive the medical aid as the Emirati side did not coordinate with them. She said Palestine is a sovereign country and UAE should have spoken to the authorities first. The Emirati flight at Israel's airport marks the first public flight between the two states, despite the UAE not having any official ties with Israel. Meanwhile, Jordan has warned it will review the relationship with Israel over its plans to annex the occupied West Bank. Prime Minister Omar al-Razzaz accused Tel Aviv of taking advantage of the coronavirus pandemic to implement its unilateral moves. The US says it will withdraw from the Open Skies Treaty, which permits unarmed aerial surveillance flights over member countries. Talking to media in Washington, President Donald Trump accused Russia of repeated violations of the accord. Russia's foreign ministry responded it had not violated the treaty and the US withdrawal will be very regrettable. It said the Trump administration is trying to derail all agreements on arms control. Meanwhile, Trump said the US will formally withdraw from the accord in 6 months. The US president later said there is hope for talks in the future.
I think we have a very good relationship with Russia, but Russia didn't adhere to the treaty. So until they adhere, we will pull out. But there's a very good chance we'll make a new agreement or do something to put that agreement back together.
The party to the treaty, including Russia, Canada and the UK, the NATO headquarters said it will hold a North Atlantic Council meeting today to address Washington's unilateral decision to withdraw from the pact. Moving on, France, Germany and 8 other European nations say they regret the US decision to exit the Open Skies Treaty with Russia. The accord permits unarmed aerial surveillance flights over member countries. In a joint statement, the European countries said they share concerns over repeated violations of the accord by the Russian Federation. They said the treaty remained functional and useful despite Moscow's actions. Meanwhile, NATO ambassadors have also met to discuss the US withdrawal from the nearly 2 decades-old pact. An official said that all NATO allies agree that arms control and non-proliferation make vital contributions to achieving the alliance's security. The Open Skies Treaty was agreed in 1992 by the US and NATO allies, as well as Russia and former members of the Soviet bloc. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has slammed China for its proposed national security legislation on Hong Kong. In a statement, Pompeo called the law arbitrary and disastrous and urged Beijing to respect Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. He said the U.S. strongly urges Beijing to abide by its international obligations and respect Hong Kong's democratic institutions. The statement from the top U.S. diplomat went further than the State Department's Thursday warning to China. The national security law seeks to ban treason, sedition and subversion in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, pro-democracy activists have called for mass protests against what they see as erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy. China has urged the US to cut off military ties with Taiwan and stop selling weapons to the disputed territory. Beijing's foreign ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian urged Washington to abide by one China principle. He said military ties between the US and Taiwan will further harm bilateral relations.
China firmly stands against U.S. selling arms to Taiwan and has lodged solemn representation to the United States. We urge the U.S. to abide by one China policy and 3 joint communique. Stop arms sales to Taiwan and military contact with Taiwan in order to avoid further damage on U.S.-China relations and Taiwan Strait relations.
Pakistan and China have rejected the remarks made by Ambassador Alice Wells regarding the multi-billion-dollar China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project.
Separate statements, Islamabad and Beijing reiterated that Sino-Pakistan partnerships benefited the whole region. Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Faruqi said Pakistan's public debt relating to CPEC is less than even 10% of its total debt. Without naming Alice Wells, Faruqi said the claims made by some public officials on Pakistan's debt obligations relating to CPEC are contrary to facts. Meanwhile, in its strong-worded statement, the Chinese embassy said Wells' speech is completely baseless. The Chinese embassy said the statement was an attempt to defame Sino-Pak relations and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The embassy said the USA should show basic respect to choices made by China and Pakistan.
China says its defense spending will rise at its slowest rate in 3 decades, by just over 6.5% in 2020. The report presented in the parliament said China's defense spending stands at over $178 billion. China's defense budget in 2020 is about a quarter of the US defense budget last year, which stood at $686 billion. In 2018, China announced its largest military budget increase in 3 years at slightly above 8%. Meanwhile, China refrained from setting a 2020 GDP growth target and pledged to step up spending and financing to support its economy. Premier Li Keqiang said due to uncertainty caused by COVID-19, Beijing will prioritize stabilizing employment and ensuring living standards. The Pentagon's Joint Staff has launched a planning group to focus on the U.S. military's long-term plans during and after COVID-19. The new planning group will explore and reconsider how the military is positioned around the world. It will also observe possible vulnerabilities where adversaries could try to take advantage of the U.S. focus on COVID-19. In a statement, Special Assistant Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff Air Force, Colonel Didi Halfhill, said the planning is to ensure that the U.S. military protects their homeland and supports all allies around the globe. The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation says the shooting at the Texas Naval Air Station is being investigated as a terrorism act. Earlier, U.S. Navy shot down an active assailant at its Corpus Christi station, which wounded a security force member. FBI Special Agent Lee Gibbs said investigators are working to determine whether a second person of interest is at large in the community. She said officials are still working to process the crime scene. In a separate statement, the U.S. Department of Justice said it is working with the FBI and will analyze electronic media found at the scene. The Justice Department did not elaborate on the nature of that electronic media. Guatemala's President Alejandro Giammattei has criticized the U.S. for deporting migrants infected with the novel coronavirus. In an online talk, Giammattei said the United States has treated Guatemala in an unkind way. President Giammattei said Washington has not even sent a single mask during the pandemic. He said the government does not understand why the U.S. will send flights full of infection. 190 deportees have tested positive for the virus so far, amounting to 5% of the country's cases. In a statement, the U.S. Embassy listed the economic aid it has designated recently for Guatemala. It said Washington is committed to the health and prosperity of the Guatemalan people. Pro-Russian separatists have put troops on high alert as they conduct tank and artillery drills near the Horlivka village of Ukraine. Tanks, howitzers and Grad multiple rocket launchers participated in the drills. A separatist claimed that fighters' training was intensified to counter the increased aggression of the Ukrainian army. The conflict, which broke out in 2014, has left 13,000 people dead. Large swathes of the Ukrainian territory have also fallen under separatist control. Ukraine, Western countries and NATO accuse Russia of sending troops and heavy weapons to prop up separatist fighters in Donbass. Hungary has announced it's shutting down transit zones on its southern border. This comes just a week after the European Court of Justice ruled Hungary's practice of holding asylum seekers at transit camps is equivalent to unlawful detention. Prime Minister Viktor Orban's chief of staff said around 280 asylum seekers held in border camps will now be moved to reception centers. He said the Hungarian government disagrees with the ruling, but as an EU member state, it would adhere to all the court rulings. He said the move poses a risk to European security. Gala said in future, asylum requests can only be submitted at the Hungarian embassies and consulates. Orban's increasingly strict anti-immigration policies and Hungary's treatment of asylum seekers have been regularly criticized by European leaders. In Burundi, the head of the Election Commission has appealed for patience as ballots were collected and tallied following a tense poll. Earlier, Burundi voted to elect its president, legislators and local officials in an election marked by allegations of fraud and threat of COVID-19. Chairman of the National Electoral Commission said the process of counting votes will take several days. He said the results of presidential, parliamentary and local polls will be announced at the same time on Monday or Tuesday. The last election conducted in 2015 descended into violence that left 1,200 people dead. President Pierre Nkurunziza, whose government has repeatedly been accused of rights abuses, will step down after 15 years. The UN says the remains of a fugitive, a major suspect from the 1994 Rwandan genocide, has been identified in a grave in Congo. In a statement, a UN prosecutor said Augustine Bizimana, who was indicted on 13 charges in 1998, is believed to have died in 2000. The statement read, Bizimana's remains were identified by DNA testing. The announcement follows the arrest of another suspect, Felicien Kabuga, in Paris last week. Kabuga was indicted in 1997 on 7 criminal counts, including genocide. Iran says 10,000 of its health workers have been infected with the deadly coronavirus so far. Deputy Health Minister Qasim Janbabai expressed alarm over the high infection rate among medical personnel. Janbabai said some of the infected health workers have already died of COVID-19. Earlier, Iranian media had reported a lack of personal protective equipment kits for workers on the front line against the pandemic. The UN says the novel coronavirus is spreading throughout Yemen, where it says the healthcare system has in effect collapsed. A UN official said the war-torn country is in a difficult situation right now, and the situation is extremely alarming. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has appealed for urgent funding. A spokesman for the office, Jens Leerk, said aid workers report having to turn people away because they do not have enough medical oxygen. He said the UN estimates that it will seek $2 billion for Yemen to maintain aid programs through the year end. Yemeni authorities have so far reported 184 coronavirus infections, including 30 deaths to the WHO. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced $67 million aid package for cyclone-hit eastern state of Odisha. Cyclone Amphan killed nearly 100 people after it swept in from the Bay of Bengal. Speaking in the West Bengal town of Basirat, Modi said the government tried everything to minimize the damage. Several thousand people have been left homeless after the most powerful cyclone in over a decade hit India and Bangladesh this week. Vast tracts of land are underwater and police are using drones to assess the damage in Kolkata. A local official said around 26,000 homes have been completely destroyed and another 14,000 damaged in the Sundarban Gusaba area. 16 people were also killed in neighboring Bangladesh as storm damaged 200 bridges in coastal districts. The World Wildlife Fund says deforestation rose by 150% this March compared to the 2017 and 19 average for the same month. In a study, the WWF analyzed satellite data of 18 countries compiled by the University of Maryland. In a statement, the German arm of WWF said around 6,500 square kilometers of rainforest were felled in March alone. It said there's ample evidence to suggest the boom in rainforest deforestation is being fueled by COVID-19 pandemic. With strict lockdowns in place in many countries, authorities haven't been able to patrol nature preserves and indigenous territories as often. This is a situation that criminal organizations and illegal loggers have been using to their advantage. The study said the forests were most heavily hit by deforestation in Indonesia, with more than 1,300 square kilometers lost. A 37-year-old Thai street artist is splashing walls across Bangkok with murals depicting the fight against the coronavirus. Details in this report.
As the world recuperates from the novel coronavirus pandemic, an artist in Thailand has come up with a unique way of keeping the virus at bay. He paints murals on the walls of Bangkok. Going by the pseudonym Newborn, which means restless hands in Thai, the 37-year-old signature designs feature what he refers to as winged creatures. They resemble birds dressed as health workers fighting against an ominous-looking green coronavirus.
I want to play my part in reminding people about the situation and recording the history in which we all helped each other by staying home to stop the spread of the virus.
Newborn said he preferred the canvas of the streets rather than a formal art gallery to exhibit his work so that it remains more accessible to the public.
On the basis of our society, there is a huge gap between art and the ordinary people. Thais are not into art. They don't really understand it. Therefore, I put artwork on the streets at places where people sitting in cars will be able to see it driving by, where they don't have to go to an art exhibition or a gallery to see the art.
Newborn prefers painting during the hours of night. Most of his spray paint murals take around 2 hours to finish. Although the artist says he is not popular in Thailand, his artwork has been displayed abroad in countries like Japan, the US, Germany, and most recently Palestine.
Global benchmark Brent crude price has touched its highest level since March, supported by low U.S. crude inventories. The oil price rebound also follows OPEC-led output cuts and recovering demand as governments ease COVID-19 restrictions. Brent crude settled at over $36 per barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude closed at about $34 a barrel. On Thursday, U.S. Energy Information Administration said crude inventories fell by 5 million barrels last week. It said stocks at oil storage hub at Cushing and Oklahoma dropped by over 5.5 million barrels. Fuel demand has gradually ticked upwards in recent weeks as governments worldwide begin to ease the restrictions. Wall Street stocks have dipped as simmering US-China tensions weighed on markets struggling to gauge the pace of economic recovery. Fears of a renewed trade war have cut short the US stocks' April rally, and the bourses are moving in a tight range. Drop in healthcare shares declined the S&P 500 index, along with losses in consumer staples sectors. The Dow Jones Industrial Average traded nearly 1% lower, while Nasdaq Composite was at a fraction lower. Oil prices have also plunged after China's decision to omit an economic growth target for 2020 amid the coronavirus outbreak. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.